a queen who slept with a corpse for 46 years. This isn't some medieval legend or Gothic fairy tale. This is the true story of Juana of Castile, a woman whose love became her prison and whose grief destroyed a kingdom. The year 1506, and the most powerful queen in Europe refuses to bury her dead husband. Not for days, not for weeks. For nearly half a century, while her kingdom crumbles and her family plots against her, Juana keeps Philip the Handsome's rotting corpse in her bed, convinced he will return to her. But this isn't just a story about madness. This is about power, betrayal, and a woman trapped by the men who claim to love her. Her own father declares her insane to steal her throne. Her son abandons her to seize control of an empire. And through it all, she clings to the one thing they cannot take from her, the body of her beloved husband. What really happened in that locked room, in Tordesillas' palace? How does a brilliant queen become a forgotten prisoner? Why did she choose a corpse over a crown? And what dark secrets drove her family to bury her alive while she was still breathing? The truth is more twisted than any horror story, more shocking than any royal scandal, because sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones who die, they're the ones who refuse to let the dead rest. This is the story of a love so obsessive it defied death itself, a grief so consuming it devoured a kingdom, and a woman whose madness might have been the only sane response to an insane world. What would you do if losing the person you loved most meant losing yourself completely? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The stone walls of Tordesillas' palace hold secrets that would make the dead weep. In a chamber high above the Spanish countryside, where winter winds carry the scent of forgotten prayers, and summer heat bakes the silence into something thick enough to choke on, a woman sits beside a coffin. Her name is Juana of Castile, and she is talking to a corpse. The year is 1506, and death has already won its first victory. Philip the Handsome, Duke of Burgundy and King of Castile, lies pale and still in his ornate casket, his skin waxy yellow in the candlelight. His wife hovers over him like a moth drawn to flame, her fingers tracing the silver crucifix still clutched in his lifeless hands. "You're cold," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "But you'll warm up, you always do when I touch you." The crucifix catches the light as she pries it from his rigid fingers, turning it over and over in her palm. This small piece of silver had been Philip's anchor to the divine, his final connection between life and whatever lay beyond. Now it becomes hers, not as a symbol of faith, but as proof that death is merely another country from which he might return. Outside, the autumn wind rattles the windows like skeleton fingers demanding entry. But Juana's world has shrunk to the space between her chair and Philip's body, a universe measured in the inches between her living breath and his eternal stillness. She had been beautiful once. Men wrote poems about her dark eyes and the way sunlight caught in her black hair. Kings sought her hand for politics, but Philip had won her heart with a single dance at their betrothal feast. Now, 3 children and 6 years of marriage later, those same dark eyes are rimmed with sleepless red, and her hair hangs in unwashed tangles around a face carved hollow by grief. "The physicians say you have a fever," she continues, adjusting the golden wedding ring that slides loose on her shrinking finger. "But I know better. You're just resting. You're tired from all the ruling and the wars and the ceremonies. Sleep, my love. I'll watch over you." The ring twists easily now, worn thin from months of nervous turning. She remembers when Philip had placed it on her finger, in that cathedral in Lierre, how it had fit perfectly then, how his hands had been warm and alive and strong enough to hold her whole world steady. Hours pass, or perhaps days. Time has become meaningless in this tomb that still pretends to be a bedroom. Servants come and go with food she doesn't eat and wine she doesn't drink. They speak in whispers, crossing themselves when they think she's not looking, leaving their offerings on the table like tributes to some grief-mad goddess. When morning light finally filters through the heavy curtains, it illuminates a scene that will haunt the palace for generations to come. Juana has not moved from her vigil. Her lips are still moving, in constant soundless conversation with the dead. And somewhere in the depths of the palace, her father is already plotting her destruction. King Ferdinand of Aragon stands in his private study, the official document spread before him like a death warrant. The royal seal gleams wet and red in the lamplight, still warm from the wax. His advisors cluster around the massive oak table, their faces grave with the weight of what they are about to do. He speaks to him as if he lives, reports the court physician, a thin man whose nervous fingers constantly smooth his gray beard. Day and night, Your Majesty. She refuses to leave his side. The servants say she hasn't slept in a week. Ferdinand's weathered face shows no emotion as he lifts the document. The words are clinical, bureaucratic, designed to drain the humanity from what amounts to a father condemning his daughter. Her Royal Highness Juana of Castile is hereby declared mentally incapacitated and unfit to rule. This is necessary, he says, though whether he's convincing his advisors or himself remains unclear. Castile needs stability. The kingdom cannot be governed by a woman who converses with corpses. But even as he speaks, Ferdinand's hand trembles slightly as he sets down the decree. This is his daughter, the child who once ran laughing through these same halls, who had shown such promise as a ruler before grief devoured her reason. Yet kings, he reminds himself, cannot afford the luxury of fatherly sentiment when crowns hang in the balance. The iron key turns in the lock with a sound like breaking bones. Juana doesn't look up when the guards enter. She's become accustomed to interruptions, though they increasingly feel like violations of sacred space. But when she sees her father's silhouette in the doorway, something flickers behind her hollow eyes. "Papa?" The word comes out like a prayer, fragile and desperate. For a moment she's 8 years old again, running to him with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting him to fix whatever has gone wrong in her small world. Ferdinand steps into the chamber, and the guards close the door behind him with a finality that sounds like a tomb ceiling. He takes in the scene, his daughter's unwashed hair, her clothes that haven't been changed in days, the smell of death and madness that permeates the air like incense in a cursed cathedral. "Juana," he says carefully, his voice gentle but firm, "this cannot continue. Philip is gone. You must accept this and resume your duties as queen." She shakes her head violently, clutching Philip's cold hand to her chest. "No, no, he's sick, but he'll recover. He always recovers. Tell them to bring more physicians. Tell them to bring healers from Africa, from the Indies. There must be someone who can—" "Juana." Ferdinand's voice cuts through her rambling like a blade. "I am confining you to this palace until you regain your senses, for the good of the kingdom." The silence that follows is deafening. In it, Juana finally understands that her father hasn't come to comfort her. He's come to bury her alive. The betrayal hits her like a physical blow, doubling her over with its force. "You would steal my crown," she whispers, and for the first time in weeks her voice carries something other than grief. It carries rage. "You would lock me away like some mad woman in a tower." "You are a mad woman," Ferdinand replies, and the casual cruelty of it steals the breath from her lungs. "Look at yourself, Juana. Look at what you've become." But when she looks up at him, her eyes are suddenly, terrifyingly clear. "I see exactly what I've become, Papa, and I see exactly what you are." The confrontation ends, as many family tragedies do, with words that can never be taken back and wounds that will never heal. Ferdinand leaves his daughter with her corpse and her madness, carrying with him the sword he wore to intimidate her and the terrible knowledge that sometimes love requires monstrous choices. That night, Juana lies down beside Philip's body for the first time, her living warmth pressed against his eternal cold. She whispers stories into his unhearing ear. Memories of their courtship, plans for the children they'll never have, promises of a love that death cannot diminish. And in that moment, as she pulls the burial shroud around them both like a wedding sheet, Juana makes the choice that will define the rest of her life. She chooses love over sanity, obsession over acceptance, a beautiful madness over an ugly reality. She chooses to follow her husband into death while still breathing, to become a ghost, haunting her own life, to sleep with a corpse for what will become 46 years of beautiful, terrible devotion. Outside, the kingdom of Castile sleeps peacefully, unaware that their queen has just crossed a line from which there can be no return. And in the morning, when the servants bring food that will grow cold and wine that will turn to vinegar, they will find Juana exactly where she plans to remain until her dying day, curled against Philip's chest, listening for a heartbeat that will never come. The trap has been set, the prison door has closed, and the longest, strangest love story in history has begun. Time moves differently when you're waiting for the dead to wake up. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into months, and still Juana maintains her vigil beside Philip's increasingly decomposed body. The servants who dare to enter her chamber cross themselves and whisper prayers, but none have the courage to tell their queen what her nose should have already informed her, that the man she loves is rotting. The wedding ring has become her talisman, twisted so many times around her shrinking finger that it's worn a permanent groove in her flesh. She spins it while she speaks to Philip, the golden band catching candlelight like a hypnotist's pendant, mesmerizing her further into delusion. "Do you remember our wedding night?" she asks his silent form, her voice hoarse from endless one-sided conversations. "You were so nervous. Your hands shook when you tried to unlace my dress. I had to help you." She laughs, a sound like breaking glass in the suffocating silence. "You're nervous again now. Your hands are so still, but I can wait until you're ready." The physicians have long since given up their visits. What medical science exists in 1507 has no cure for a grief so profound it bends reality to its will. They leave their reports in Latin, clinical descriptions that reduce Juana's cosmic suffering to symptoms. Patient exhibits persistent delusions, refuses sustenance, engages in conversation with deceased spouse. But medicine cannot measure the weight of a heart that's forgotten how to beat for any purpose other than keeping vigil. It cannot quantify the mathematics of love that calculates eternity in heartbeats and finds them all inadequate. The palace around her has grown quieter, as if the very stones understand they house something that exists beyond the normal laws of life and death. Servants move through the halls like ghosts themselves, speaking in whispers, avoiding the corridor that leads to the chamber where their queen holds court with the dead. And through it all, Juana waits, patient as stone, faithful as sunrise, mad as the moon that watches through her window each night. She waits for Philip to open his eyes, to smile at her, to speak her name. She waits for love to prove stronger than death, for devotion to accomplish what all the prayers and medicines and royal commands cannot. In the twisted logic of her grief, waiting becomes a form of love, and love becomes a form of resurrection. If she just believes hard enough, if she just refuses to accept the evidence of her own senses, if she just loves him enough, then death becomes merely another obstacle that true devotion can overcome. The ring turns and turns, marking time in a world where time has lost all meaning. The torn letter arrives like a blade wrapped in silk, its royal seal broken and its edges rough from angry hands. Ferdinand holds the petition from the Castilian nobles, their words carefully chosen but devastating in their collective judgment. "We, the noble houses of Castile, do hereby formally question the mental competency of Her Royal Highness Juana." The letter bears 23 signatures, each one a small betrayal from men who once knelt before her throne and swore eternal loyalty. Now they whisper behind tapestries and plot in shadowed alcoves, their concerns for the kingdom barely masking their hunger for the power that a mad queen cannot wield. "She hasn't appeared in court for 3 months, reads one complaint. "The queen speaks only to the dead," states another. "Her Royal Highness has abandoned all pretense of royal responsibility," declares a third. Ferdinand studies each signature, memorizing the names of men who will now expect rewards for their treachery. Politics is a spider's web, and his daughter's madness has created a weakness that every ambitious nobleman seeks to exploit. In the royal chapel, courtiers who once competed for Juana's attention now speak her name only in past tense. "Remember when the queen was beautiful," they say. "Remember when she danced." They speak of her as if she's already dead. And perhaps, in every way that matters to a kingdom, she is. The captain of the guard delivers his weekly report with military precision. Her Majesty remains confined to her chambers. She accepts no visitors except your Majesty. She continues to speak with the deceased king. Even this hardened soldier cannot bring himself to describe what he's witnessed through the chamber's keyhole, but it's the servants' gossip that reveals the full horror of Juana's deterioration. They speak in kitchens and laundries, their voices dropping to whispers when they describe the smell that seeps under her door, the constant murmuring that continues day and night, the way their queen's laughter has taken on a quality that makes dogs howl and horses shy. She dresses his body every morning, reports one brave maid who still dares to bring fresh linens. She combs his hair and talks to him about court business. Yesterday, I heard her asking his opinion about taxes. The letter in Ferdinand's hands represents more than noble concern. It's a weapon that his daughter's own madness has forged for her enemies. Every day she spends talking to a corpse is another nail in the coffin of her reign, another reason for ambitious men to question whether Spain should be ruled by a woman who has forgotten the difference between the living and the dead. Ferdinand crumples the petition slowly, his weathered hands crushing the paper into a ball. But he cannot crush the truth it contains, nor the terrible choice it forces upon him. Save his daughter's soul, or save her kingdom, but never both. The iron key weighs heavier than crown jewels in the guard captain's palm. It's a simple thing, black metal worn smooth by use. But in this moment it becomes the instrument of Juana's transformation. From queen to prison, the sound it makes turning in the lock echoes through the stone corridors like a death knell, announcing the end of one life and the beginning of another. By order of His Majesty King Ferdinand, the captain announces to the empty hallway, because even he cannot bring himself to speak these words directly to Juana's face. Her Royal Highness is to be confined to her chambers until such time as her health improves. Health. The word is a euphemism so transparent it fools no one, least of all Juana herself. She sits beside Philip's coffin, her hand resting on his chest as if she might feel the heartbeat that stopped 6 months ago, and listens to the sound of her freedom dying. The key turns, and she understands with crystalline clarity that she will never hear it turn the other way again. This chamber, which began as a bedroom and became a shrine, now transforms into a tomb for the living. The windows remain, but they might as well be paintings of the outside world for all the good they'll do her now. "Do you hear that, my love?" she whispers to Philip's still form. "They think they're locking us away, but they don't understand. They're locking the world out. Now it's just you and me, the way it should be, the way it always should have been." The servants who bring her meals slide them through a slot in the door like offerings to a dangerous animal. They avoid eye contact, cross themselves, and retreat as quickly as their duties allow. To them, Juana has become something between a saint and a demon. A woman so consumed by love that she's transcended normal human limitations and become something altogether other. But in her isolation, Juana discovers a terrible freedom. Without the pressure of court appearances and royal obligations, without the constant intrusion of advisors and petitioners, she can finally devote herself completely to the only relationship that matters. She can love Philip with the pure, undiluted intensity that their marriage vows promised but royal duties never allowed. The iron key has locked away a queen, but it has liberated a woman to love without restraint, to grieve without interruption, to exist in a space where death is merely another word for privacy. And in the twisted mathematics of her devotion, imprisonment becomes a gift, the first honest gift her father has ever given her. 6 months of confinement have carved Juana into something unrecognizable, from the vibrant queen who once danced through these same halls. The love letter from Philip written during their courtship in Burgundy lies crumpled and tear-stained on her bedside table. A relic from a time when their love existed in the world of the living rather than the realm of the dead. "My dearest Juana," the faded ink still whispers, "each day without you stretches like a year. I count the hours until we can be together always, until nothing can separate us again." The irony cuts deeper than any blade. Death has finally granted them the eternal togetherness Philip once promised, but only at the cost of his ability to enjoy it. The memory plays in her mind like a song she cannot stop hearing. Philip surprising her with this letter on their 2nd anniversary, hiding it in her prayer book where she would find it during morning mass. She had read it while the priest spoke of resurrection and eternal life, never imagining that one day she would need to choose between the two. Now she reads it aloud to his corpse every evening, her voice cracking on words that once brought joy, but now serve as evidence of all they've lost. Until nothing can separate us again, she repeats, pressing the letter to his chest where his heart once beat. You kept your promise, didn't you? Even death couldn't separate us. The courtiers speak her name only in whispers now, and when they do, it's with the tone reserved for cautionary tales. Poor Queen Juana, they say, shaking their heads with a mixture of pity and horror. Such a love story gone wrong. They don't understand that from Juana's perspective, this is the love story going exactly as it should. If love is strong enough to survive marriage, surely it's strong enough to survive death. But the letter holds more than romantic memory. It holds the blueprint for a devotion so complete it will consume the next 45 years of her life. In its promises of eternal togetherness, Juana finds not just comfort but commandment. Philip vowed that nothing would separate them, and she intends to hold him to his word even if she must follow him into madness to do it. The ink fades a little more each time she reads it. The paper grows more fragile with each handling, but the words have already been burned into her soul with the permanence of a brand. And in the logic of infinite love, a promise made in life becomes a contract binding in death. When Ferdinand enters his daughter's chamber for what will be their final conversation, he wears his ceremonial sword not from any fear of physical violence, but as a reminder of the power that stands behind his words. The blade catches the candlelight like a silver tongue, speaking threats in a language older than words. Juana looks up from her vigil with eyes that have forgotten how to focus on anything closer than eternity. For a moment, father and daughter regard each other across a chasm that has opened wider than the space between life and death. She sees him not as her papa, but as the architect of her imprisonment, the man who chose politics over paternal love. I've come to reason with you one last time, Ferdinand says, his hand resting unconsciously on the sword's pommel. Castile needs its queen. Your people need leadership. This devotion to the dead serves no one. It serves love, Juana replies simply, and there's something in her voice, a clarity, a certainty, that makes Ferdinand step backward despite himself. You wouldn't understand. You married my mother for her kingdom. I married Philip for his soul. The sword seems heavier suddenly, its weight pulling at Ferdinand's hip like guilt given physical form. He had indeed married Isabella for political advantage, their union a calculated merger of Aragon and Castile. But watching his daughter's face as she speaks of soul-deep love, he feels something he hasn't experienced in decades. Shame. Love. Ferdinand's voice rises, anger masking his discomfort. This isn't love, Juana, this is sickness, this is madness. You're talking to a rotting corpse as if it were your living husband. Juana smiles then, an expression so serene and terrible that Ferdinand's hand tightens involuntarily on his weapon. And you're talking to your living daughter as if she were already dead. Which of us is truly mad? The accusation hits its mark with the precision of an archer who has studied her target for 27 years. Ferdinand recognizes the truth in her words, that in declaring her insane, he has indeed killed her, at least in every way that matters to a kingdom. But admitting this would require a capacity for self-reflection that kings cannot afford. Their confrontation ends not with reconciliation, but with Ferdinand's retreat. His sword glinting as he turns away from the daughter he has chosen to sacrifice for the stability of his realm. The blade he carried as intimidation becomes a symbol of his own defeat. For what good are weapons against an enemy who has already surrendered everything worth protecting? Behind him, Juana returns to her whispered conversation with the dead, and Ferdinand carries the weight of his steel and his choices out into a world that suddenly feels much less solid than the madness he's leaving behind. Hope arrives in the form of a Habsburg seal pressed into burgundy wax, its double-headed eagle catching the morning light that filters through Juana's chamber windows. The emissary who delivers it is young, nervous, clearly unprepared for the reality of Spain's sequestered queen. He stumbles through his rehearsed speech while trying not to stare at the corpse that dominates the room like an obscene center. "Your Majesty," he begins, his voice cracking slightly, "the Holy Roman Emperor sends greetings and hopes for your swift recovery. There are matters of state that require your attention, treaties with the German princes that—" "Treaties?" Juana interrupts, and for the first time in months something flickers behind her eyes that resembles interest in the world beyond these walls. Philip always handled the German alliances. He spoke their language, understood their customs. She turns to the corpse as if seeking confirmation. "You remember, don't you, my love, that delicate situation with the Duke of Bavaria?" The emissary's face goes pale as he realizes she expects him to wait for a dead man's response. When Philip fails to answer, as dead men invariably do, Juana nods as if she's received the clearest possible guidance. "Of course," she says. "You want me to handle it myself. You trust my judgment in these matters." For a brief, shining moment, Juana straightens in her chair, and the emissary glimpses the queen she might have been. Intelligent, politically astute, capable of managing the complex web of European alliances that held kingdoms together. The documents he carries suddenly seem less like diplomatic courtesy and more like genuine opportunity, but the moment passes like sunlight behind clouds. Juana's attention drifts back to Philip's still form, her hand moving to adjust his burial clothes with the automatic tenderness of a living wife tending to her husband's appearance before court. "We'll consider your emperor's requests," she says, using the royal plural that now includes a corpse in its calculation. "Leave the documents. We'll study them tonight and give you our answer in the morning." The emissary retreats gratefully, leaving behind the Habsburg seal that briefly promised redemption, but ultimately serves only to highlight the vast distance between the queen Juana was and the woman she has become. The eagle, pressed in wax, watches over her with dead eyes that mirror Philip's own, another symbol of power she can see but never again touch. The crown of Spain rests heavy on young Charles's head as he kneels before the altar of Burgos Cathedral, its weight a physical manifestation of the empire he has inherited not through his mother's death, but through her living madness. 20 years old and master of half the known world, he accepts the holy oils and sacred vows while 50 miles away his mother speaks to a corpse about tax policies and border disputes. Charles, by the grace of God, King of Castile and Aragon, Holy Roman Emperor-elect. The words echo through the cathedral's vast nave, each title a theft from the woman who should rightfully wear this crown. But Juana of Castile exists now only in legal fictions and fevered whispers, a ghost haunting her own kingdom while her son claims the throne that madness has made vacant. Charles feels the weight of every eye upon him as he rises, the crown settling onto his brow like a golden shackle. These nobles, these bishops, these foreign dignitaries, they all know the truth, that protocol forbids anyone to speak aloud. Spain is being ruled by a bastard king whose only claim to legitimacy rests upon his mother's insanity. The irony cuts deep. Charles has everything Juana once possessed: power, wealth, the devotion of millions, yet he envies her with an intensity that borders on madness itself. She at least has love, twisted, impossible, necrophilic love, but love nonetheless. He has only duty. Only the endless weight of crowns and the constant fear that madness might be hereditary. After the ceremony, Charles rides through streets lined with cheering subjects who call his name with cheering affection. They see in him the strong leadership that his mother cannot provide, the stability that her madness threatens. But their acclaim feels hollow, earned not through his own merit but through the convenient insanity of the woman who gave him life. That night, alone in the royal chambers that were once his mother's, Charles writes the first of many letters he will never send. "Dearest mother, today I stole your kingdom and they called it justice. Today I became king and felt like a criminal. How does one rule an empire built on matricide?" The letter joins others in a locked drawer, confessions to a woman who would not recognize his handwriting, addressed to a queen who speaks only to the dead. And as Charles extinguishes his candles and prepares for the sleep that will never quite come easily, He wonders if perhaps his mother is not the mad one after all. Perhaps madness lies in accepting a world where love can be buried alive while power grows fat on the corpse of devotion. The medical journal lies open on Dr. Hernandez's desk, its pages filled with careful observations and increasingly desperate treatments. 20 years of scientific inquiry have produced nothing but documentation of failure. Patient continues to exhibit delusional attachment to deceased spouse. Attempts at forced feeding result in violent resistance. Bloodletting produces no improvement in mental state. Each entry reads like an admission of defeat. Medieval medicine, with its humors and bloodletting, its prayers and purgatives, stands helpless before a grief so profound it has rewired the very foundations of human reason. The learned doctors from Salamanca, the wise men summoned from Paris and Bologna, have all retreated in bafflement, leaving behind only their Latin prescriptions for ailments that have no cure. Subject refuses all medications, reads one particularly frustrated entry. When presented with hellebore root, traditionally effective for melancholic conditions, patient fed the preparation to the deceased husband's corpse, claiming he looked pale and needed strengthening. The physicians have tried everything their training provides: cold baths to shock the mind back to reason, hot baths to restore the balance of humors, fasting to purify the soul, enforced feeding to restore physical strength. They have bled her, purged her, prayed over her, and performed exorcisms. Nothing changes. Juana continues her conversations with the dead, continues her meticulous care of Philip's increasingly decomposed body, continues to exist in a reality where love conquers death through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Damaged. Hernandez closes the journal, with hands that shake slightly from age and frustration. In his 40 years of medical practice, he has seen plague and pestilence, madness and melancholy, but never anything like this. Juana's condition defies not just treatment, but classification. Is it madness, devotion, some new form of grief that medicine has yet to name? The truth, which no physician dares write in official records, is that Juana has moved beyond the reach of earthly healing. She exists now in a space between life and death, sanity and madness, love and obsession. Medical science, with its crude instruments and cruder understanding of the human heart, cannot map the territory where she dwells. And so the journal remains a monument to futility, page after page documenting the progress of a malady that has no cure, because it may not be a malady at all. Perhaps, the doctor thinks in his darkest moments, Juana has simply discovered a form of love so pure and terrible that it transcends the normal boundaries of human existence, and perhaps that is not madness, but enlightenment of the most dangerous kind. The succession document bears the weight of an empire in its carefully crafted clauses and legal machinations. 20 years after her confinement began, Juana's name appears on parchment that strips away every vestige of her royal authority, leaving her queen in title only while transferring actual power to her son. The irony tastes bitter. She is deemed too mad to rule but sane enough to sign away her kingdom, whereas Her Majesty Queen Juana of Castile has shown herself unable to fulfill the duties required of sovereign rule due to ongoing mental incapacity. The language is clinical, designed to obscure the human cost of bureaucratic efficiency. Each clause represents another year of isolation, another conversation with the dead that someone, somewhere, has recorded as evidence of unfitness. Charles studies the document with the cold calculation he has learned from watching kingdoms rise and fall on the strength of their paperwork. Every word has been chosen to provide legal cover for what amounts to deposing his own mother, but law, he has discovered, is simply organized brutality wearing judicial robes, and justice is whatever those in power decide to call their actions. The signing takes place in Juana's chamber because she has not left it in 2 decades and shows no inclination to break that pattern for the mere formality of losing her crown. She examines the document with surprising clarity, her eyes tracking across the Latin phrases that reduce her life to legal abstraction. "So," she says finally, her voice carrying an edge that surprises everyone present, "you would make it official. I have been dead to this kingdom for 20 years. Now you would make it legal as well." "Mother," Charles begins, but she cuts him off with a gesture that still carries the authority of queens, even broken ones. "Do not call me that. Mothers raise their children, queens rule their subjects. I have done neither. She signs the document with a flourish that belongs to the woman she once was, before grief rewrote the fundamental architecture of her soul. There, you have your kingdom, and I have my corpse. We are both satisfied with our choices. The document disappears into the machinery of empire, filed away with treaties and trade agreements, another piece of paper that changes the world through the simple act of existing. But as Charles watches his mother return to her whispered conversation with the dead, he realizes that all the legal language in Christendom cannot make him feel like anything other than an orphan ruling with a stolen crown. The mirror shatters with a sound like thunder in the suffocating silence of Juana's chamber, its silver fragments reflecting not one face, but dozens. A kaleidoscope of madness that multiplies her image into infinity. She stares at the broken glass, searching for the woman she remembers being, but finds only a stranger with wild hair and eyes that have forgotten how to focus on the world of the living. "Who is that?" she asks Philip's corpse, pointing at the fractured reflection. "Who is that woman who looks so old, so tired? She can't be me. I'm still young. I'm still beautiful. You told me I was beautiful." 25 years of conversations with the dead have carved lines into her face that no amount of royal cosmetics can disguise. Her hair, once the envy of European courts, hangs in gray tangles that frame a face carved hollow by grief and malnutrition. The reflection shows her truth. She has become a ghost, haunting her own life. More dead than the man she refuses to bury. The broken mirror creates 100 small reflections, each one showing a different angle of her deterioration. Here, the woman who once danced with kings. There, the mother who gave birth to an emperor. Everywhere, the queen who chose love over sanity and found herself with neither. She kneels among the glass shards, cutting her fingers as she tries to piece together a reflection that makes sense. Blood drips onto the silver fragments, adding crimson to the chaos of broken light. For the first time in years, she feels something other than the constant ache of loss. She feels the sharp, present reality of physical pain. "Look," she tells Philip, holding up a bloodied shard that shows only her eye, wide and startled by this reminder that she still inhabits a body that can bleed. "Look how real I am. Look how alive." But Philip, being dead, offers no comfort for this crisis of self-recognition. The broken mirror lies between them like a prophecy fulfilled, the final shattering of illusions that have sustained her through decades of impossible devotion. She has broken more than glass. She has broken the last barrier between the woman she was and the creature she has become. The servants who clean up the mess speak in whispers about the queen, who no longer recognizes herself, who argues with her own reflection as if it were another person entirely. But they miss the deeper truth. Juana has not lost her mind. She has simply discovered that madness is the only rational response to a world that punishes love and rewards betrayal. The death notice arrives like a herald of resurrection, its black-papered paper bearing news that Philip's younger brother has died of fever in the Netherlands. To any reasonable person, this would be cause for mourning. To Juana, trapped in the twisted logic of her grief, it becomes irrefutable proof that her beloved husband must be returning from whatever realm has claimed him. "Don't you see?" she explains to Philip's mummified corpse, her voice rising with an excitement that borders on euphoria. "Death is taking your family one by one. It's gathering them to you, preparing for your return. First your father, then your sister, now your brother. They're calling you home." She spreads the death notices across their shared bed like tarot cards revealing a cosmic plan. Each black announcement becomes evidence in her case against mortality itself. In the calculus of her madness, death is not an ending but a collecting, a gathering of loved ones that can only culminate in Philip's inevitable resurrection. "This is how it works," she continues, her fingers tracing the formal Latin phrases that announce the passing of Habsburgs across Europe. "Death takes the supporting players first, clears the stage for the star's return. You were always the favorite, the golden son. Of course they would save you for last. The logic is insane, but it carries the internal consistency that makes delusion so powerfully seductive." Every death in Philip's family tree becomes proof of life's grand design, every funeral a rehearsal for the resurrection she knows must come. Juana has constructed a theology of grief that places her at the center of a divine comedy, where love conquers death through patient waiting. She begins writing letters to the dead, addressing them to Philip's deceased relatives and reading the replies she imagines they send. Your brother writes that the other side is beautiful, she tells Philip, but not as beautiful as the world he left behind. He's preparing a place for your return. The servants who bring her food and water find these letters scattered around the chamber like prayers made manifest, each one evidence of a mind that has not simply broken, but has rebuilt itself, according to laws that exist nowhere but in the geography of infinite loss. And in the terrible mathematics of her devotion, Juana calculates that she need only wait a little longer. Death has taken almost everyone Philip ever loved. Surely it will return him soon to the one person who loved him most. The death notices are not announcements of ending, but invitations to beginning, and she reads them like love letters from the beyond. Philip's burial clothes have become Juana's obsession, her holy mission, her daily sacrament in the religion of impossible love. Every morning she selects new garments from the wardrobe that has remained untouched since his death 30 years ago, dressing his mummified remains with the tender care of a new bride, preparing her groom for their wedding day. Today you'll wear the blue velvet, she murmurs, her voice carrying the intimate tone of married couples discussing their daily routines. It brings out your eyes, makes you look so alive. The court will be impressed when you return. They'll remember why they loved you. The ritual has become elaborate, almost liturgical in its precision. She bathes his body with rose water and oils, imported at devastating expense from the Orient, combs his remaining hair with a silver brush that once belonged to her mother, and dresses him in garments that would bankrupt lesser kingdoms. Each morning, Philip emerges from her ministrations looking like a king prepared for court, rather than a corpse prepared for burial. The servants who witness these daily transformations cross themselves and whisper prayers for both the dead and the living. They have watched Juana's technique evolve over the decades, becoming more skilled at the impossible art of making death appear like sleep. She has learned to position his limbs for maximum dignity, to arrange his features in expressions of peaceful contemplation, to create the illusion that breath might return at any moment. You're so quiet this morning, she tells him as she adjusts his collar with a fussy attention to detail that defined their marriage. Are you tired? Did you sleep poorly? I know the bed is hard, but I'm here. I'll always be here to make sure you're comfortable. The burial clothes themselves tell the story of their relationship. Court robes from state occasions they attended together. Hunting attire from their brief happy years before politics and death intervened. Even the simple white shirt he wore on their wedding night, now yellow with age but still precious for its memories. And in the twisted sacrament of her daily devotions, Juana finds the closest thing to happiness she has known since Philip's death. For these few hours each morning she can pretend they are still married in the conventional sense, still preparing for days they will spend together in the world of the living. The ritual of dressing him becomes the ritual of hope, made manifest. Evidence that love can indeed conquer death through the simple act of refusing to acknowledge its victory. The rosary shatters on the stone floor of Juana's chamber, its silver beads scattering like tears made solid, each one catching candlelight as it rolls into the darkness beyond her perpetual vigil. She had been praying, or what passes for prayer when directed to a corpse, when the final thread of her reason snapped with an audible crack that seemed to echo through the very foundations of the palace. 40 years, she whispers, her voice carrying a terrible clarity that is somehow more frightening than her usual delusional rambling. 40 years I have waited for you to wake up. 40 years I have loved a dead man better than I ever loved a living one. The broken rosary had been her mother's, blessed by 3 popes and worn smooth by Isabella's devout fingers during the conquest of Granada. Now its beads lie scattered like the fragments of faith that have sustained Juana through 4 decades of impossible devotion. She stares at the destruction she has wrought and feels something shift inside her skull, a tectonic movement of sanity and madness grinding against each other until one must give way. You're never coming back, are you? The question comes out like a confession torn from her throat by hot irons. This is it. This is all we get. 40 years of me talking and you never, ever answering. For the first time since Philip's death, Juana sees her situation with crystalline clarity. The rotting corpse, the wasted decades, the life she has sacrificed on the altar of a love that died with the man she cannot release. The vision lasts only moments before madness mercifully clouds her perception again. But those moments are enough to break what was left of her mind. She begins to laugh, a sound like breaking glass mixed with sobbing, a noise that makes the guards outside her door cross themselves and retreat to safer distances. It is the laughter of a woman who has finally understood the cosmic joke of her existence. She has become the punchline to a tragedy that God himself is telling. The scattered beads reflect her fractured state, prayers broken, faith shattered, hope dispersed into shadows. She crawls among them, trying to gather the pieces of silver that mirror the fragments of her sanity, but they slip through her fingers like water, like time, like the life she might have lived if she had chosen differently. When the servants find her hours later, she is lying among the broken rosary beads, her lips moving in constant prayer to a God who has either abandoned her completely or loved her enough to let her love impossibly, and perhaps, in the end, there is no difference between the two. Silence descends upon Juana's chamber like snow burying a graveyard, muffling even the sound of her own breathing, until the room exists in a vacuum of complete quiet. For 41 years she has spoken to Philip's corpse, sharing court gossip, reading letters aloud, singing lullabies she once sang to their children. But now her voice has simply stopped, worn out like a clock spring wound too tightly for too long. The unfinished embroidery lies abandoned on her lap, its needle frozen mid-stitch in a pattern that was meant to depict their coat of arms. She had been working on it for 13 years, adding a few stitches each day between conversations with the dead. But now her hands rest motionless, as if the very concept of completion has become foreign to her understanding. The servants notice the change immediately, the eerie absence of the constant murmuring that has provided the soundtrack to their duties for 4 decades. They press their ears to her door and hear nothing but the sound of their own breathing, the rustle of their own clothing, the beating of their own hearts, suddenly amplified in the unnatural quiet. "She's not speaking to him anymore," reports the head chambermaid, her voice hushed with superstitious dread. "Just sitting there staring at nothing. It's like watching someone die without actually dying." But Juana has not died. She has simply moved beyond the need for words. After 41 years of one-sided conversation, she has finally achieved the perfect communication that comes only with complete understanding. She knows now what Philip would say to every comment, every question, every desperate plea for acknowledgement. She has memorized the shape of his silence so completely that words have become redundant. Silence is the second silences. So soon, the embroidery needle catches the light like a tiny sword, its point still threaded with gold silk that was meant to outline Philip's crown. But crowns, like words, like hope, belong to a world that Juana has finally, completely left behind. She exists now in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between one breath and the next, in the eternal moment that stretches between life and death, and in this silence that she has finally achieved. Juana discovers the peace that 41 years of talking could never provide. She has become a living ghost, a breathing corpse, a woman who has followed her husband so far into death that she can no longer find her way back to life. The embroidery will remain forever unfinished, its pattern incomplete, like the love story that brought her to this moment of perfect, terrible quiet. Light streams through the chamber window for the first time in years, not because the sun has changed its course, but because Juana has finally turned her face toward it. The beam of golden warmth cuts through the perpetual gloom of her self-imposed tomb, illuminating dust motes that dance like spirits freed from their earthly bonds. She sits in the same chair where she has maintained her vigil for 45 years, but something fundamental has shifted in the architecture of her despair. Her eyes, so long fixed upon Philip's desiccated form, now track the sunlight as it moves across the floor with the ancient rhythm of celestial clockwork. "The world is still there," she whispers, and her voice sounds strange after months of silence, rusty as an unused hinge. All this time, the world kept turning. The sun kept rising. People kept living and dying and loving and forgetting to love. It is not recovery. Her mind remains fractured beyond any physician's ability to heal, but it is acknowledgement. For the first time since Philip's death, Juana recognizes that a universe exists beyond the boundaries of her grief. The revelation comes not as joy, but as simple, terrible fact. Life has continued without her participation, indifferent to her suffering, unconcerned with her devotion. The sunbeam reaches Philip's corpse, and for a moment shrieks of light and shadow make him appear almost alive again. But instead of feeding her delusions, this optical illusion finally dispels them. She sees clearly what 45 years of darkness had hidden. He is not sleeping, not resting, not waiting for the right moment to return. He is dead, thoroughly and permanently dead, and all her love cannot change that fundamental fact. "I followed you as far as I could," she tells him, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "But there's a place where the living cannot go, isn't there? A boundary even love cannot cross." The sunbeam moves on, following its eternal path across her chamber floor, and Juana watches it with the wonder of someone seeing light for the first time. She does not move from her chair, will never again move from this room, but her spirit takes its first tentative step toward accepting what her mind has always known, but her heart has refused to believe. The physician's report lies heavy in Charles's hands, its pages documenting the systematic failure of a body that has forgotten how to live. Her Majesty's condition continues to deteriorate, the careful script reports. She consumes insufficient food to sustain life, refuses medical intervention, and appears to be preparing for death with the methodical determination she once applied to love. 68 years of life have worn Juana down to essential elements: will, grief, and a stubborn refusal to abandon her impossible vigil. Her body has become translucent as parchment, her skin stretched tight over bones that jut like accusatory fingers pointing toward the mercy of an ending too long delayed. Charles studies the medical terminology that reduces his mother's final decline to clinical observation. Patient exhibits signs of voluntary starvation, persistent melancholia, and acute withdrawal from external stimuli. The words cannot capture the spiritual exhaustion of a woman who has loved so completely that she has no energy left for the simple act of breathing. "How long?" Charles asks the physician, though he already knows the answer from watching his mother's face grow more ethereal with each passing day. She is becoming a ghost before his eyes, her substance gradually dissolving until only her devotion remains, stubborn and implacable as bedrock. "Weeks, perhaps days," comes the reply. "Her Majesty appears to be dying not from disease but from a surfeit of life, as if 46 years of existence were compressed into these final moments, and her body simply cannot contain such concentrated experience." The irony cuts deep. Charles commands armies, rules empires, makes decisions that affect millions of lives, yet he is powerless to save the one person whose life shaped his own. All his wealth, all his authority, all his earthly power means nothing against the simple fact that his mother has decided to die. That night, Charles drafts another letter he will never send. "Dear Mother, I have learned to rule kingdoms but never learned to heal hearts. I can command the living but have no authority over the dying. Forgive me for being the son you needed me to be rather than the son you wanted me to be." The physician's report becomes another document filed in the vast archives of empire, one more piece of paper documenting the human cost of power, and in her chamber, Juana continues her slow dissolution, preparing for the reunion that 46 years of waiting has made inevitable. Death comes to Juana not as an enemy, but as a long-awaited lover, arriving finally to claim the woman who has been courting him for 46 years. She draws her last breath in the same chamber where she drew her first breath as a widow, her journey completing a perfect circle of devotion that encompasses nearly half a century of impossible love. Her final word is "Philip," spoken so softly that the attending priest must lean close to hear it. The name floats in the air like incense, carrying with it the weight of decades of conversation, argument, pleading, and prayer, directed toward a man who could never answer. In the end, all of language reduces to this single word, this name that has been both her prayer and her curse. The physician who records the time of death notes that she dies not with the struggle typical of the aged and infirm, but with the peaceful expression of someone finally laying down a burden too heavy to carry any longer. Her face, which has been carved hollow by grief for so many years, relaxes into something approaching serenity as her breathing simply stops, gentle as the end of a song. Charles arrives too late for final words, but in time to witness the aftermath of a love that outlasted reason, sanity, and ultimately life itself. He finds his mother's body, positioned exactly as it has been every day for 46 years, seated beside Philip's corpse, her hand resting on his chest, her face turned toward his, as if they had been having an ordinary conversation when sleep overtook them both. The chamber where Juana spent nearly half a century feels different now, as if her death has broken some spell that kept it suspended between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. It whirls more freely, light penetrates more deeply, and the oppressive weight of infinite grief finally begins to lift. For the first time since her confinement began, servants enter the room without crossing themselves, without whispered prayers for protection. Death has finally completed his collection, gathering both husband and wife into the democracy of the grave where all earthly titles become meaningless, and only love endures. And in the peaceful stillness that follows Juana's final breath, there is a sense not of ending but of completion. A love story that required 46 years to tell, finally reaching its inevitable conclusion. The empty chamber echoes with 46 years of one-sided conversation, its walls holding the memory of every word Juana spoke to her silent husband. Now, with both occupants finally at rest, the room reveals itself as what it always was, a tomb that masqueraded as a bedroom, a shrine that pretended to be a palace, a monument to love that transcended every reasonable boundary. Servants enter with white sheets and holy water, their movements reverent as they prepare to close the book on the strangest love story in Spanish history. They work in silence, awed by the weight of what they are witnessing. The end of a devotion so pure and terrible that it rewrote the laws of human possibility. The chamber's furniture tells the story in objects. The chair worn smooth by 46 years of constant occupation. The bed that held two bodies but only one living soul. The window that Juana avoided looking through because the world outside felt like betrayal of the world she had built around her grief. Dust motes dance in the afternoon light, liberated now to move freely through space that has been still as death for nearly half a century. The air itself seems different, lighter, somehow, as if a great pressure has been released, allowing the room to breathe again after decades of holding its breath. Charles stands in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold into the space where his mother spent her life, dying by degrees. He sees the chamber not as others might, a scene of madness and tragic waste, but as evidence of something the world has forgotten how to recognize. Love so complete it required no reciprocation. Devotion so pure it could survive the death of its object. The empty chamber will be sealed after today, locked away like a secret too dangerous for ordinary mortals to contemplate. But its silence speaks louder than any words could. Here lived a woman who loved one man so completely that she followed him into death while still breathing, who proved that the heart's capacity for devotion knows no limits, save those imposed by the finite nature of flesh. And in the dust and shadows and fading light, something eternal remains. The echo of a love that was perhaps not madness after all, but the only sane response to a world that had forgotten what love could be. Charles stands alone in his private study, the letter in his hands written in his own careful script but never intended for any eyes but his own. It is a confession that reads like an indictment. I was emperor of half the world, yet could not find the courage to visit my own mother. I commanded armies but could not command myself to show mercy to the woman who gave me life. The guilt that has gnawed at him for decades finally has words, and they taste bitter as wormwood on his tongue. For 46 years, he told himself that Juana's confinement was necessary, that her madness threatened the stability of the realm, that a son's duty to his subjects outweighed his obligation to his mother. Now, with her death making all justifications meaningless, he sees the truth that political necessity obscured. He was simply afraid. Afraid of her grief, which made his own losses seem trivial. Afraid of her love, which made his own relationship seem shallow and calculated. Afraid of her madness, which might have been hereditary and certainly seemed more honest than his own carefully maintained sanity. The crown feels heavier tonight, its gold transformed to lead by the weight of maternal blood upon its surface. Charles built an empire that spanned continents, but he could not build a relationship with the woman who made that empire possible. He spoke 6 languages fluently, but never learned to speak the only language his mother understood, the language of unconditional love. "I should have visited," he writes in the letter that will join dozens of others in his private drawer. "I should have sat with you, talked to you, honored your grief, even if I could not understand it. I should have been a son instead of an emperor, at least for one day, at least for 1 hour. The confession offers no absolution, only acknowledgement of a debt that can never be repaid. Tomorrow, Charles will return to the business of ruling the world, signing treaties and planning wars and making the 1,000 daily decisions that empire requires. But tonight, he is simply a man who failed his mother and must live with that failure until his own death provides the only possible forgiveness." The letter joins its companions in the drawer that holds his secret life, and Charles prepares for another sleepless night, haunted by the ghost of a woman who loved too much while he loved too little. History, that great liar, records Juana's story in careful euphemisms that drain the humanity from her suffering. The official chronicles speak of mental incapacity and regrettable indisposition, reducing 46 years of love and loss to footnotes in the larger story of Spanish imperial glory. The historians who write these sanitized accounts have never loved anyone enough to follow them into madness. Queen Juana, called the Mad, was confined to Tordesillas Palace due to mental infirmity, reads the official history, its dry language leaching the blood from a story that pulsed with the raw intensity of human devotion. She was succeeded by her son, Charles I, who ruled with wisdom and brought glory to Spain. No mention of the corpse she slept beside, no record of the conversations that lasted nearly half a century, no acknowledgement of love so fierce it required its own vocabulary. The truth becomes inconvenient to a kingdom that prefers its queens sane and its love stories tidy. Juana's impossible devotion threatens the comfortable narratives that societies tell themselves about the proper limits of human emotion. Better to call her mad than to admit that love might demand such complete surrender, that devotion might exact such terrible prices. In the great libraries of Europe, scholars will debate the nature of her affliction, constructing elaborate theories about melancholic humors and female hysteria. They will diagnose her across the centuries. These learned men who have never watched their beloved die, never felt the earth shift beneath their feet when death steals the only person who made life meaningful. But the sanitized histories cannot erase what happened in that chamber, cannot explain away the physical evidence of a woman who chose love over sanity and found that the choice was no choice at all. The kingdom moves on, as kingdoms do, forgetting its inconvenient queens and their inconvenient truths. And in the margins of the official histories, careful readers might notice what the chroniclers could not completely hide. That once, in Spain, a woman loved so completely that she followed her husband into death while still breathing, proving that the human heart knows depths that history fears to map. The single rose lies like a drop of blood on the marble tomb that bears 2 names, Juana and Philip, finally united in death as they never truly were in life. Charles kneels beside the grave, his emperor's robes spread around him like the wings of some great guilt-stricken bird, and places his tribute with the careful precision of a man performing surgery on his own soul. The flower is perfect, red as passion, delicate as the love that destroyed his mother, beautiful as the devotion that consumed 46 years of her life. It seems inadequate, this small gesture of enormous regret, but it is all he has to offer a woman who gave him everything and received nothing in return. "Forgive me," He whispers to the stone that holds no record of her suffering, only the stark facts of birth and death, with 46 years of madness compressed into a hyphen between dates. Forgive me for being afraid of your love, for choosing the kingdom over my mother, for letting you die alone with only a corpse for company. The words hang in the air like incense, offering prayers to a woman who needed sons, not subjects. Charles built an empire that stretched from Vienna to Peru, but he could not build a bridge across the chasm that separated him from his mother's heart. He conquered nations, but could not conquer his own fear of her impossible devotion. The rose begins to wilt almost immediately in the Spanish heat, its petals curling inward like the broken heart that chose it. By tomorrow it will be brown and brittle, a perfect metaphor for gestures that come too late to matter. But today, in this moment of perfect useless sorrow, it represents something beyond symbolism. A son's acknowledgement that love should not be feared, even when it transcends the boundaries of reason. Charles rises from his knees with the careful movements of a man carrying the weight of an empire and the additional burden of maternal blood on his hands. The rose lies on the tomb like a confession made manifest, and as he walks away, he carries with him the knowledge that power means nothing if it cannot protect the people who matter most. The shared tomb rises from the earth like a prayer-made stone, its marble surface carved with the coat of arms that united two kingdoms and destroyed one woman's sanity. Here, finally, Juana and Philip lie together as she always intended, their bodies separated only by the width of stone that seems almost welcoming after 46 years of sleeping beside a corpse. The inscription reads simply, Juana, Queen of Castile, and Philip, her beloved husband, reunited in death as love intended. The words carry none of the clinical language that filled medical reports and legal documents, none of the euphemisms that historians will use to sanitize her story. Here, at last, truth speaks in its own voice. This was about love, nothing more and nothing less. Visitors will come, pilgrims drawn by the story of a woman who loved beyond the boundaries of reason. Scholars seeking to understand the mystery of a queen who chose madness over acceptance, romantics who find in Juana's tale the ultimate expression of devotion. They will leave flowers and whispered prayers, testimonies to the power of a love story that required 46 years to tell. But the tomb holds more than two bodies. It holds the end of an impossible vigil, the completion of a covenant made between the living and the dead. For nearly half a century, Juana kept her promise to never leave Philip's side. Now death has honored her devotion by granting them the eternal togetherness that life made so difficult and love made so necessary. The peaceful rest that eluded Juana in life finally arrives, with death, her body released from the terrible burden of loving someone who could not love her back. The shared tomb becomes not a monument to madness, but a testament to the lengths to which the human heart will go when it loves without reservation, without hope of reciprocation, without any reward save the simple knowledge that it has loved completely. And in the shadows cast by the marble angels that guard their rest, there is the sense that this ending is not tragedy, but triumph, the victory of a woman who refused to let death diminish her devotion, who proved that love can indeed conquer death by simply refusing to acknowledge its authority over the human heart.